All right, everyone. This is Christopher Prush with Veterans for America First podcast. This is episode 5. Today, I have an amazing story. I have Miss Mary and Mrs. Becky Rasmussen with a phenomenal organization based in South Dakota called Call to Freedom. It is a nonprofit that is completely committed to assisting, helping, and exposing a serious crime in this country that nobody wants to talk about. The horrendous, evil industry of sex trafficking that is rampant across this country. So, Becky, Mary, please introduce yourselves.
Well, hi, I'm Becky Rasmussen, Executive Director and founder of Call to Freedom. And Call to Freedom is an anti-human trafficking group based in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, but we work with many different states. And we provide supportive services to those that have been victimized by sex or labor trafficking.
Mary.
And hi, my name's Mary, and I would be considered a survivor of cartel trafficking, which would include sex and labor trafficking. I work through Call to Freedom as their survivor program coordinator. I work with survivors, mentor them, and I also look at their program and what is vital for victims on their path and healing to being a survivor and also a thriver in life.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, both of you. So we're all aware of it. The southern border crisis is completely out of hand. This year alone, we've seen 4 million crossings of illegal immigrants crossing across the southern border. The Department of Homeland Security has exposed, surprisingly, that the Venezuelan government has completely emptied out all their prisons, and are encouraging those to go north into Mexico and into America. Now, people have this massive misconception about what's really happening along the southern border. It's not just about illegal immigrants coming here. It's also about sex trafficking. It's also about human trafficking, and it's also about drug trafficking and cartels. This issue isn't right or left. It's just common sense, and it's absolutely no reason why just over 2 years ago we had an 87% decrease in all of these, not all the problems, but most of the problems. It's a simple fact that our veterans along the southern border, our military, our paramilitary, our police, our firefighters, our city council members, our mayors are completely overwhelmed in all of these capacities, in Texas especially, in Arizona, in New Mexico, and California. And even in the Gulf states, Florida has seen an increase in this as well. So, today we're going to focus just on one, maybe two of those pillars. So So, Becky, you have a nonprofit in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, for everyone who wants to know. And I've known Becky for years. I remember just 5 years ago, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Becky, but you started out, it was just you and maybe two other women. And, in 5 years, later, you have over 20 employees. You're doing a fantastic job. You've saved countless lives. So kind of just give me a little more background about, you, who you are, and really, honestly, a lot of the viewers are going to wonder, why did you go into this?
Yeah. So I am a faith-driven woman. And so, for me, this is a call. And never did I realize how great the need would be when I began Call to Freedom. Formed Call to Freedom in November, applied for our 501(c)(3 in November of 2015, got accepted in January of 2016. Had an encounter in August of 2015 with a young girl called Marissa. And that was in Sturgis at our Sturgis rally, one of the biggest events here in South Dakota. And after that encounter, I had learned that this young girl who went missing and was found again actually was a survivor of trafficking, but had been re-recruited. And I began to ask the questions, how can an individual get out of human trafficking situations and then be re-recruited back? And they began to tell me that there were only 298 beds across the state, United States, for victims of human trafficking. And only in statute had it been actually put into statute early 2000s. And so a lot of people weren't familiar or talking about what human trafficking, but it's been happening for years. And survivors, there's a stat that 97% of survivors are never identified because of our lack of knowledge within our communities, but also because survivors don't feel safe or have their basic needs met. And so providing services to those that are coming out of sex and labor trafficking is crucial, because in that life, a trafficker controls every aspect of that survivor's life or that victim's life. And so from their identification to their housing to what they eat to their children at times. And so understanding that it's not easy for a victim of human trafficking to leave. And so when we started Call to Freedom, we just started getting the word out. And within the first year, we were all simply volunteers with one part-time paid staff. And we had over 30 survivors come forward. And I was working a lot of multiple hours doing Call to Freedom and working another job as well, starting it. And I just knew that we needed to put more into it. So we started applying for grants. There were no stats. There's very limited stats across the United States. There isn't a lot of data about this work. It's just really starting to be developed, but the need is there. Today, we are serving over 800 individuals who have walked through the doors of Call to Freedom since 2016. And 2017 was really, in the end of 2017 is when we added staff. We started adding staff. And today, when we get into 2022, we're at 27 staff, 24 full-time and 3 part-time staff. And our needs are even greater than that. And so if that doesn't tell you the need that's happening just here in South Dakota, it should. And the need is great. And survivors need those comprehensive services to be able to successfully get out of those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic story. I mean, that's so true. I mean, what you're doing is massively, massively needed. Mary, you're a survivor of this, evil industry. Please, give us your background. What your story. I mean, people need to hear this and be, in my opinion, confronted with the truth about what's really happening in this country, and not just in South Dakota, but this is and this is an issue that's in every single state, and it's only getting worse.
Yes, human trafficking is a nationwide issue. I'm on a survivor group. It's a support group that's nationwide. It actually is out of Texas. So women on this and men are from almost, I've seen people come from almost every state. So it's not a specific state. South Dakota, I just believe, is leading the way with Call to Freedom, because many survivors will come forward and actually see the services Call to Freedom is providing as a person as a whole. All of the needs that a person requires as they come out of, quote, the life. It's not a life, but when they are a victim and then they need to go on their path. Mm-hmm. My story journey started many, many years ago. I was a young lady, a girl next door, I would say, family in South Dakota. And for reasons, I wanted to leave the state, wanted to go out to the East Coast, try those borders out of the Midwest and see what life was about. I had no clue what I was going to encounter or run into. I was raised in a very Christian family, attended a Christian high school, and started in a Christian college. So I was not expecting, of course, when you're younger, you don't say, I want to be trafficked. You want to actually get married, have children, whatever your life has plan is as a high schooler or a junior high, but you never would say, I asked to be trafficked. No one asks to be trafficked. So I moved out to the East Coast, and unfortunately I did meet the wrong man, a very evil, dark man. I didn't know it at the time because I didn't understand the ways of the world. I did not. You look back sometimes and you'll say, wasn't there something there to show me? Wasn't I smart enough to figure it out? And the answer is, I'm very smart. I was looking to be accepted and loved and have friends. I never felt I belonged. And a lot of youth feel that way, and even adults. So I was very, very vulnerable to meet people that would take advantage of my situation coming out of the Midwest and going to the East Coast. I didn't understand. So I met, and I don't call him a gentleman. I don't give him that title or that recognition. He's an evil man. Through that, he said he was from Cuba. I would have no clue what country he was from. I didn't know slangs of Spanish, nothing. I learned that he was from actually Colombia, South America. And it wasn't, I would say, people say, well, this process of exploitation, it does take, depending on the group that is trafficking you, maybe in a couple of months, but the abuse had started. He lured me away from my family, my friends, knowing that my family and believing that my family did not care about me, did not want anything to do with me, and I was not loved by them. There is reasons behind a person becomes vulnerable and listens to that, especially somebody who people would say is very smart. And so I was always told growing up, I would never amount to anything. I would never become anything. I was not worthy. So this group took me in and found that vulnerability in my own life. That is what traffickers do nationwide and worldwide. They find the vulnerability in someone's life. When I met this group, again, I was trafficked out of Miami and also New York, and eventually going to South America. So when I lived in South America, I wanted to leave at a certain couple of years later. I was not allowed to leave, and there's some criminality behind that in what you're forced to do because you believe this is your life. You made your bed, you have to lie in it, and you have to accept it. There's a lot of shame, and there is a lot that happens where that controlling comes into play. So you believe you're always, like people say, that you're held captive. You're held captive spiritually, mentally, and physically at times. So it depends on the group. Again, you have, mine was in a cartel, but you have family members that do that. You have gangs, biker. I mean, there's many different. And then you come into the labor trafficking side also. When I came home, because that was a whole journey in itself, might be even a different show for you, Chris, in how I came home and what was available to me and the support, there was none. Nobody discussed trafficking. I didn't even understand what happened to me because it was normal. So being sold, not understanding it, people say, how can you not understand it? Because that was my family. That was my love and acceptance. It wasn't until I received counseling, some services, but not for a survivor of human trafficking were available. So it was not until Call to Freedom that I actually identified and what had happened to me, even though people would say, I'm so sorry, what happened to you? Now just get on with your life. Well, that's not how it works. Went through some many struggles in this. I can talk about it openly and be transparent because the traffickers in this cartel were involved in drug dealing, arms dealing, and also human trafficking. They all go hand in hand. I can talk about it because most are in prison or have been extradited in prison, or also they've been murdered. So my ex has been murdered, so I can openly discuss, maybe not all the details, because again, that isn't what it's about. And my journey is not about me. It's about how to help others and to recognize this is a national crisis. People do need to recognize it and openly talk about it.
Mary, I really appreciate that perspective. I mean, that's so accurate. You know, this isn't just one state or two states. I mean, it is a nationwide, disease, if you will. It's such an evil industry that's affecting us. But and what's amazing to me is South Dakota is leading the way, and that's kind of, I don't want to say it's embarrassing to some degree, just because South Dakota is largely considered a flyover state, a forgotten state, and a lot of times we don't have the resources of a bigger state like Texas or Florida or New York, but yet we're Becky, your organization is far and away above a lot of the similar organizations you probably know about in other states, and that's just what's so amazing is South Dakota is leading the charge with this because they see a real issue that needs to be addressed immediately. And Becky, you brought up an interesting comment about how this is so underreported. So this story is so told. Is that more of a willing ignorance that both parties don't want to talk about it, or is it really just people don't know?
I think it's a combination of things. There's a lack of education in how to identify this. So, first responders are coming in contact with human trafficking victims. And when I mention first responders, I'm talking about law enforcement, talking about state's attorneys. I'm also talking about medical communities, our school systems, anybody who's in contact with vulnerable populations, and sometimes not even vulnerable populations, domestic violence shelters, but they're not trained to identify what human trafficking is. And so training is key. A lot of times, and most survivors I work with don't self-disclose or self-identify until later in life. They live that thinking, like Mary said, that this is normal.
Yeah.
And so it's really up to us as a community, as service providers, to get educated on this, to understand how it's facilitated, but also to provide safe places and basic needs for survivors so they have the ability. And Mary's story, the fear of her losing her son and the threat of her son was real. But if I'm a service provider and I don't know her background, I don't know what they're threatening her with, she's not going to disclose to me because she wants to make sure that her family is safe. Traffickers use these things to keep those individuals in that victimization. And so really, when somebody comes into contact with you in an emergency department, law enforcement, most survivors or victims of human trafficking do not self-disclose for multiple reasons. It could be fear factors happening behind the scenes, or it could be that they don't even know because of this manipulation that they are a victim of human trafficking. So as a community, it is our responsibility to get educated. If you understand the signs, you're able to sense that something just isn't right in this situation, and you don't respond to it and you don't identify or be that safe place for that individual. The life expectancy of a trafficking victim is 7 years. So as a community, you're right, this is a national crisis, because if we don't start doing something about it and breaking the silence over something that people don't want to talk about, then we are going to lose people's lives and we're going to lose families. And I'm sorry, that's not good enough. And so how do we get that message across, Chris? And we really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this and break the silence.
Well, and excuse me, that's what Veterans for America First is so proud about is again, we want to address issues and rights and the freedoms of first responders, police officers, firefighters, pastors, and veterans obviously. But the problem is this is you guys are a prime example of those institutions, of our military, of our police, our churches being completely overwhelmed, that we and that's why I deeply respect what both of you are doing, because you have taken a national issue and brought it so locally, saying we completely respect those institutions, but we're going to help out in our own way, and you're doing a phenomenal job. And that's what really America's all about, is starting locally and having a local impact on a nationwide level. That's what you two are doing. So keep continuing going from here on. Mary, I really appreciate your perspective, as I said before, because I feel like people have a massive misconception about sex trafficking. Growing up, and largely on a ranch, like I did up in Minnesota, just outside of Brookings. You guys are familiar with that in South Dakota. What's funny is we're always told that a sex trafficking victim is primarily a Hispanic female, young woman. And you guys break that mold and say yes and no. So help me out with that, because I mean Becky, you've mentioned grooming, so I mean, if Mary could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I personally don't like the word grooming. Becky and I had chatted about this because, as Becky had stated, it almost sounds like it's a positive thing, like grooming or something, and it's not a positive thing, because that's where the manipulation happens. That's where the control happens. People, and I pray that people remember that, and as I've talked with Becky about it, this is a business for traffickers. It is controlled by the demand. It's a supply and demand, and human beings are being sold as a commodity, and that should not be accepted in our United States. And I'm firm on that because I've had when I wanted to come home and I was not able to, literally the cartel had looked at me and said, "You are the dumbest person we have ever met." And I thought, what the heck? Now, I didn't understand, which we try to get across. You don't understand when you're trafficking situation, depending on the type. I did not understand. My normal became abnormal, and when I came home, that abnormal now has to become normal. And that's a very tough journey, wondering why all these people are nice to you. What is this unconditional love? We don't know those things. So I think that grooming, which should be kind of discussed in a different fashion, because I've had some friends who have made a decision, and they'll say, "I made a decision to go into prostitution. I made a decision to sell my body." Did they really? I mean, what were the events that led up to them thinking that they made that choice? And then a pimp will come in. A pimp will control that. Now you owe that pimp, and now you cannot leave. It takes a lot for a person to leave that situation. You are going to go through beatings and rapes and food withheld. There's too many controlling factors, and yet they're going to turn around and tell you it's your fault. And you literally believe that. And then they turn around and buy you things and make you feel like, oh, you're accepted. So that's that intermittent reinforcement of like a shivering dog that you accidentally leave outside for an hour. And then you're like, my dog, I got to let my dog in. And that dog comes in and says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you for letting me in." And that is what it feels like. So you're so appreciative if you get food. You're so appreciative if you can get a new outfit, because you are literally, you can wear this outfit, you have to have this nail polish. Mine was not the prostitution side, and it's not prostitution. It is, the person is being prostituted. They are not, it's not prostitution. So I try to make sometimes the words that we use to show the dark side of it. It's not like the movies, Pretty Woman, Taken. It's not glamorized. And when people want to get out, it is a very tough road. That is why the services, the responders, I would have been through a domestic violence shelter had I have not had a family that was supportive of me when I came home, and I would not have been identified. I believe now I may have been identified because of the awareness that's starting to come out, and people are talking about this, but yet more talk needs to be done. More work needs to be done. When there's only 1 to 3%, I'm a part of that. I know women who didn't make it out. I know women nationwide and worldwide that have not made it out. So more work needs to be done. Sorry there, John. I just went off a little bit talking too much, and I don't mean to, but it's a pretty.
You're fantastic. That's awesome. I mean, we need to, people need to start calling it what it is. It's modern day slavery, and nobody wants to talk. Yeah. Nobody wants to say that, because there's a negative connotation with history. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Human beings are, people are people. The fact that this is still existing in a developed first world country is ridiculous. And so, like I said, I really appreciate Mary, you giving a firsthand account of this, because again, I'm not seeing it in mainstream media, and I'm hoping Becky's story and your story continues to go to the forefront, and we throw this right in their face and say, this is an issue everybody needs to pay attention to, left, right, and center right now. So Becky, real quick, you did bring up training and people to watch for signs, and I'm sure you've reached out to local law enforcement, you've reached out to your state government. I know you've done some work with Governor Nome. So what does that look like? For our listeners, can we what are a couple of signs people can be aware of going forward, since this obviously is a I call it a disease that affects all races across the country.
Usually a victim is in a controlled situation. Sometimes you'll see an individual that's in your area that maybe doesn't wearing the right kind of clothing. Maybe they look pale when it's clearly summer. They won't make eye contact with you. Their trafficker will make sure that they don't interact with other people. And so those are just a few signs. You can go to calltofreedom.org and spend some time and look at those signs. We also have trainings online. So we do Zoom trainings. We're starting parent connection trainings, the things that are happening online to our kids. The latest movement that we're seeing with these organized fronts is voice. We talk a lot about women. We talk a lot about girls. Now, guess what? This is business. So these traffickers change how they do business when you're not talking about it. And that's what the thing about human trafficking is. It stays hidden. It stays in the dark. And that way these individuals can operate without anybody recognizing what's happening or bringing light to that. And so we need to talk about our kids that the average age is 11 to 14. So get educated. We have resources. Zoom in trainings that started in November. We would love to have you sign up for those, calltofreedom.org, but get informed or go locally. If you have a local entity within your community, attend a training, get that awareness piece and also that education piece.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what's so key to this whole process is education, education, education. And, I mean, so, everyone, I strongly, strongly encourage everyone listening, please go to www.calltofreedom.org. It's a fantastic organization with a plethora of resources that we all need to have, to learn, to train. This should become second nature really for us to pick up on these signs, so we can call the authorities immediately and expose this evil industry and get it out of our country. So again, Becky, Rasmussen, thank you very much. Miss Mary, thank you extremely. I cannot thank you guys enough. This is just such an important issue. Some would, again, just to reiterate again, for everybody listening, people need to, people who think, why are we talking about sex trafficking on a veterans, podcast? Because again, with what's going on in this country these past 2 years and, with this evil industry the past, 10, 20 years, our veterans, our police, our firefighters, our pastors, our priests, our reverends, they are completely overwhelmed. And what's happening at the southern border right now is completely inexcusable. Again, I don't care if you're left, right, or center. It's just common sense. And it's drug trafficking. It's human trafficking. It's sex trafficking. It's illegal immigration on the highest it's ever been. So I strongly encourage you, all of you. And sex trafficking and human trafficking are literally half of what's going on at the southern border right now. But we need to encourage everyone around us to, again, be mindful, be prepared, be vigilant. Go to Becky's website again, www.calltofreedom.org. Get educated. I beg of you. Thank you both very much. We'll get this up immediately and we'll get this out to people. So I really appreciate it. Anything else before I let you guys go?
I think on the border issue, so I think something maybe to talk about is that organized crime has many different faces. When we're talking about intersectionalities, we're talking about drugs, we're talking about human trafficking, we're talking about guns, we're talking about all this crossover of illegal activity. These are organized fronts. And so we see two things coming from the border. We're seeing organized crime that is victimizing vulnerable individuals that are coming across the border, but they're also bringing in and coming into communities and establishing cartels and gangs within our communities. You can look at the rate in South Dakota that's happening right now. We have an increase in homicides. We have an increase in drug arrests. We have an increase of things that are happening within our community. But also on the flip side of the border, we have a lot of vulnerable people looking for a new life that are coming across our borders that the traffickers are waiting to perp as well. And so they are waiting at the borders for these vulnerable individuals to come across to exploit them for either sex or labor. And so we have a lot of issues that are going on in this money-making industry. And what's happening in the money-making industry of human trafficking is when we don't talk about it, guess where guns and drugs are moving to? They're moving to selling human beings. And here's why. They can make a lot more money. They're under the radar and it's not identified and it's not being prosecuted. So until we start taking this on and really seeing human trafficking is happening and we take it seriously, we provide those resources to be able to investigate these cases, to get survivors out of those situations, we're going to see a shift from what we see in drugs and some of these homicides to more human trafficking. And until we start identifying it, it stays in the dark. And guess what? That's where they're going to be going because this is a money-making field and it's organized crime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Again, Becky Rasmussen, Miss Mary, I really appreciate it. Guys, again, go to the website. I beg of you. It's calltofreedom.org. So let's get that out. Let's get the word out and make this nationwide issue eradicated as much as we possibly can. Thank you both very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.